Hello, I'm Kads, and welcome back to the Raid Starter Pack. Today, we're going to be diving into Tag Team Arena, also known as 3v3 Arena. And this is a direct result of feedback from you guys. I did post on my community tab about a month ago what episode you guys wanted to see next, and the majority of you voted for Tag Team Arena, so we are delivering on that promise. Now, it is no secret in the game that Tag Team Arena is a very, very unpopular game mode, and I honestly cannot blame you for saying that. But at the same time, I think it's a fairly important game mode to consider trying to progress in at least somewhat. And when I say that, I mean with respect to the general return on investment in terms of the reward space. Even if you are only in the bronze tiers, I think it's worthwhile once a week to pick up the 300 energy. I use it every single week. It comes in handy for pursuing fusions or developing champions in Minotaur, etc. Whatever comes up on the day that I need to use it. And then of course you get one free ancient shard every week. You also get the Drexstar fragments, and so he is a pretty decent champion to help you in the mid game and going in towards the late game. And then of course you also get a couple free copies of the Broadmaw rares to fuse your first Broadmaw. When you first start venturing into silver, you do have the advent of the daily accessory 4 to 6 star. These can be very, very terrible or very, very useful depending on what they are, and the ones you get from this can be either cleansing and or refresh accessories. So if you're wondering where people get their refresh accessories, this is the location. This is the only location, so you at least want to get to silver just so you can start getting those every day like everyone else who competes in a silver and above is getting. But you do also have access to a void shard here, which you can get every 2 weeks or twice a month. And then of course we have the crown jewels here in gold, where you have the better accessory where it's only 5 star and 6 star, so it's more likely to be useful on your account. And of course the big kahunas here, the sacred shard, which you can get once every 4 weeks, and a legendary tome that you can also get once every 4 weeks. And some people also enjoy getting the rank and rarity charms here, which I think you get either once a week or once every 2 weeks. I don't quite remember because I don't typically do it, but nonetheless it can be something useful to buy if you can make it into gold. And of course, not really shown here, but you do have to reach and stay in gold 1 for at least the advent of the mission if you are pursuing Ramontu Dragsblood, and so that is somewhat enticing to a lot of people in order to make sure that they can get to at least gold 1 for that particular mission. Afterwards, it doesn't really matter where you are, but I would recommend staying in gold if you can, which is most certainly a tall order depending on the quality of your champions, but nonetheless it is doable even on a free-to-play account like myself. So hopefully you've been convinced to participate in Tag Team Arena a little bit more than you already do, just with the summary of all of the rewards you could potentially get. And I understand it's definitely not the most fun game mode, but for me, I think of it as farming up the gold bars in order to purchase my rewards on a regular basis. And you can basically see everything that I have purchased and will purchase. And right now we're working towards our next sacred shard in a week and a day, so 8 days or so. And little bonuses like this help ensure that I do have enough shards and or legendary tomes to continue to progress on my account, and so I think it's extremely beneficial to push up to gold if you can. So for starters, let's talk about some of the strategies you can employ depending on where you are in your progression in Tag Team Arena. The first thing to mention is the Moth defensive strategy, also known as the Monday through Thursday strategy, where you typically come to your defense here and you would set it to single man defenses. Now, I don't have an example of that going on right now because it is Sunday at the time of this recording, meaning we're headed towards the reset soon, so I've had to put in my real defenses, and we'll go through these a little bit later as we get to the more of the end game side of things. But the main reason for the Moth defense is that you will have a single man as your defense, meaning you will be an optimal target for other people, meaning they will be more likely to attack you and push you further down into the red region, which will then put you against other people who hopefully have their one-man defenses out there, and then all of us can collectively farm each other during the week when it's not really that competitive. We don't really care about your ranking just yet, and you can maximize the amount of gold bars you can get per day just by spamming easy fights. So you can think of it as the community helping itself, so we don't have to deal with full-blown defenses all throughout the week. And in my particular instance, because I just know the types of teams that I can typically handle when it comes to the weekend reset type things, where I have to get back into the yellow zone at least to stay in the current rank, which for me is gold 1, I typically keep my one-man defenses in there until Friday. Now, if you really, really want to be an awesome part of the crew, I highly recommend that you don't simply come over to your defense and just remove all of the 3 people at the back and just leave the leads in there, because that's very annoying for a lot of people, myself included, because you'll have like a single Armands, or you'll have a single UDK, or you'll have a single Wukong, which, yes, it is a one-man defense, but it's much harder than it needs to be. So if you do want to participate truly in the Moth defense movement, then you should just set it to some food champion or something super easy to farm that just makes it easier for other people to attack you again, push you further into the red zone, and thus make your own fights easier during the week. So let's all help each other if we can, and not just remove all champions but the leader, because sometimes it can be a very, very annoying and or time consuming champion to kill, even though they are solo. And a quick explainer for those who don't know exactly how Tag Team Arena works: the red zone means you're going to derank when it comes to the reset, which is once per week, and you can see here that it's going to be in about 3 hours at the time of this recording. If you wanted to stay in your current rank, whatever it may be, you would need to be in the yellow zone here, which is in the middle, and if you want to upgrade a rank, you need to be in the green zone up here in order to promote. And again, these zones are only applicable at the end of the week when it resets, and so you need to be in the yellow zone at the end of the reset, and then you'll stay in your rank. So you can see here that for me, if I don't get a few more wins, then I will actually demote down into silver. If this doesn't apply if you're in bronze 1, because there is nothing lower, so it doesn't really matter, and we'll get to early game strategy here in a second. But if you do want to rank up, you need to be in the green zone at the time when reset happens, and we'll talk about ways to make that easier for oneself going forward. The other quick thing I want to talk about that is useful to employ is the benefit of buying the first or maybe potentially second refill from the gem shop when it comes to Tag Team Arena refills. It only costs you 15 gems if you just want to do 1 refill a day, which is typically all that I do, but you get 10 more fights for the day. And again, if you're employing the Moth strategy, meaning you're just going to be farming a bunch of single man defenses, it's not going to be that much more time consuming just to do that. And this simply just increases the amount of gold bars you're going to have to be able to spend on the rewards, and it makes it a lot easier to obtain some of the more expensive things if you're getting into the silver and or gold tiers. The second refill, if you so choose, is going to cost 40 gems, so it's basically on par with a classic arena refill. I personally don't buy the second refill. I think 1 a day is enough, and it's also a great deal for only 15 gems. But if you do want to try and push for a Tag Team Arena tournament, for example, or get extra points in CVC, then you could start spending gems on refills and making sure that you get all the extra points and all the extra gold bars. So now let's focus on the early game, which basically means you're going to be focusing on developing your starter champion, building your first dungeon teams, etc., and not really focusing too hard on the arena, specifically Tag Team Arena. So when you unlock it, you are going to be in gold 1, and basically I would do the same thing I already said, where you want to farm as many one-man teams as you can and just leave your one-man defense in there the entire time. Again, make them fairly easy champions to kill, champions you're not actively building, so not your starter champion, not anything else. Put in food champions, commons, uncommons, whatever it may be, but make them super easy to kill, and that's basically going to be your early game strategy until you are ready to push higher up into Tag Team Arena. So just leave in your one-man defenses all week. Don't even switch it. Don't worry about it. And then hopefully you can just farm other one-mans who are also doing the same thing. And again, as we talked about in the reward space section, what you're really aiming to do is making sure that you can get the energy once a week, the ancient shard once a week, to work on your Drexlar fragments as well as the Broadmoor rare fragments. So that's what you'd be getting by employing that strategy as soon as possible in bronze 1. Skipping ahead in time, let's talk about the mid and or late game strategy here, or essentially whenever you feel like you want to get out of bronze 1 and you want to start pushing for bronze 2 and above, and or push into silver. Because now you're actually starting to want to climb in the ranks, this is when you're going to start to employ the Moth cycle, meaning you're going to leave your one-man defenses in there most of the week, and then when it comes to Friday, Saturday, and especially Sunday, you want to put in your real defense, whatever that may be, for your progression in the game. And that will make it much easier to get into the yellow and or the green zone, depending on what you're trying to do. At this point in the game is where you're going to want to start building arena-specific champions. One's focus prior to this would typically be focusing on Demon Lord Clan Boss teams and or progression in dungeons, but at this point, 6 months to a year into the game or earlier, depending on your luck and or spending habits, this is where you're going to want arena specialist champions who are built specifically speedy for the arena and or slow, depending on your builds, and you want them in arena specific builds in order to support the team if they're a support, or deal damage if they're a damage dealer. When it comes to arena offense, you do need to worry about picking your fights. You need to be selective. You don't want to lose, because losing 2 out of the 3 battles means you lose overall, meaning your ranking or rating is going to go down, which is not what you want to do if you're trying to climb. And so your focus should be to win at least, or identify teams where you know that you can win at least 2 out of the 3 of the matches. Ideally, you would win all 3 out of 3 of the matches. And when you're doing this on offense, you want to be trying to follow kind of the basic rules of targeting teams, meaning that if you see that they have a super tanky team, that means that they're probably not going to be very, very fast. So you can run a speed and control team and take care of them that way, depending on what their defense is. Obviously, there is a ton of nuance when it comes to this. So, if you run a speed team into a bunch of stone skin, you're probably going to have some problems. And so there's stuff like that you will also have to consider. And I'll show you an example of how I typically approach that later on. The inverse is also true. If you're seeing a speed team like this Arbiter team here, then you're probably going to want to set up a tanky team to try and handle them. And we employ these 2 strategies because the attacker always has the advantage, because you can see the team that you're going into, meaning you can pick champions to counter it if you have them, and they are forced to be using whatever presets they have set up, or just whatever their AI determines is relevant for them to use. And so you can typically exploit that and use that to your advantage. When it comes to arena defense, the strategy is basically the same. You're going to want to set up, 1 or 2 speed teams, depending on, again, your champions you have, your progression in the game, etc. But you probably also want to have at least 1 to 2 tanky teams as well. Contrary to popular belief, the goal of your defensive team is not really to win the defensive fights. It's to be so scary that people don't actually want to spend the time attacking you. So as an example, I can look for a team that I would definitely not want to fight. And I'm thinking of the teams in aggregate, not just a single team, because it's very easy to find 1 team that you can fight, but it's a lot harder to find 3 teams that you can fight. And this is because every single team composition in the game will have some exploitable weakness. But the thing you're going to have to contend with in Tag Team Arena is that you might have the champions to counter 1 team, but then that might use the same champions that you would have used to counter Team 2 and or Team 3, and therefore your strategies and or attention will get divided, and you won't actually be able to handle all 3 of the teams back to back to back. You might just be only able to handle 1 or 2. And so for that reason, you want to make your teams as scary as possible so that people just don't even want to attack you in the first place. A good example of a scary team right here would be this team, Arbiter, Armand's, Mikage, and Queen Ava. They have a lot of fast champions, a lot of control here with these 2 stunning champions, and then block revive, which can be very, very deadly if they go first. And they're practically guaranteed to go first unless you want to gamble on the speed rate, which is a very dangerous strategy. The other 2 teams aren't as scary, but team number 3 here, you do have to consider the fact that they have a Hegemon, which is typically in a stun set or a provoke set or even a day set I've seen once or twice. And so you're going to have to build a team that can handle that. And you also have to worry about Ramontu potentially disabling your passives. Lydia can also deny revival, so you have to be careful about revivers. And then Leo can't be CC'd. So these are just things you'd have to consider if you wanted to counter the team. This is a lot easier to counter than the first team, but nonetheless, you'd have to think about that, and you'd have to bring immunity champions or cleansers or whatever, or shield champions to be able to tank the Hegemon and or deal with the other elements of the team. And then this team isn't that scary, but Harima has her passive, so Savage sets, ignore defense effects, are going to be less effective. Wukong is just annoying because he's Wukong. Duchess is Duchess, and Python is also super tanky. So this is just a very tanky team. It's going to be very difficult to deal damage with them, especially with AoEs, with a Duchess passive as well as Python passive. And so overall, I would say this is a great combination of teams that are very scary and would personally make me not want to attack them, because I could at best have a chance to beat 2 out of the 3 teams. But again, I'm looking for the 3 out of the 3 win when possible. So the things to think about when you're coming up with an arena defense team, like I said, you kind of have to pick between, do I want a speed team or do I want a tanky team? And you can kind of mix and match. You can have hybrid teams as well. But again, the main goal is to get people to not attack you. But that doesn't mean that you just want to create this super annoying stall defense that doesn't have a win condition, but nonetheless can just be annoying or very tanky. Because honestly, I love teams like that, because I'm willing to spend the 3 to 4 or 5 minutes it will take to beat the slow tanky team, just because I know I can't lose per se, and I know that they can't win, and thus I'm guaranteeing myself a win. So I'd rather target teams like that. So I don't recommend doing that. You should always have some form of win condition on your team. Could be a Candrafon with a Duchess or something. Could be some nuker paired with a stone skin reviver or whatever else your strategy is. Just keep in mind that you do want to have a win condition on every team. Otherwise, it makes you a pretty decent target because eventually you can overpower a stall tanky team. And so you may be wondering what makes a scary team. And as an example, I'm just going to go through what my defenses are as is. Not that they're the most scary defenses in the world, but nonetheless, it's the best that I could come up with for my champions and my roster. And so here, team 1 is my speed team. And so we have a couple of safeguards and a couple of annoying features. We have the deadly combo of Arbiter and Armands, like I mentioned before. That means that if you're going to go against it, you have to gamble on the fact that you may be faster than me or you might be slower than me. If you are faster than me, then great, you win. It's probably GG at that point. But if you aren't, then you're going to get stuck in the control loop with Armands, meaning you'll probably give up the fight and it's kind of GG. So that's not the best gamble per se to target a speed team without being really prepared for that. And because it's very common to counter speed teams with like a Torment and or some other form of control, we do have the white couple here together so that my Narcies cannot take any form of CC because Ankor will steal it on behalf of him, and thus he will always be guaranteed a turn unless you are decreasing his turn meter. He is of course also one of the best HP based nukers in the game, so that doesn't hurt as well. And so if I do get to slam into your team, you're probably going to lose the fight on top of everything else we have there. And then on team 2 here, we have more of a go second tanky team. I still use Kyoko. I think she's pretty not underrated, but just undervalued as far as arena defense is. But she does have the passive here where she will spread increased defense across the team, and you do want her first on the team if you're going to employ that strategy. So she's just a really solid tank, taking damage for the team. I have, of course, my Star Sage Galather in there, whose AI is prioritized to swap forms and start doing his control, block active skills, and stun abilities on the alternate form, just because this is, again, meant to be a go second team. So if they have Stone Skin, it's probably worn off by now because they're going first. Then I have Pythion as my primary reviver on the team because I do force Galather to swap forms, and so we're banking on Pythion surviving and being able to cleanse and revive as needed. And then we have Harima as the primary DPS, who does obviously benefit from the increased defense spread by Kyoko when we get attacked because, again, this is a go second team, and so she will be a lot harder to deal with when she does her damage abilities. And then my last team isn't that amazing, but it is just kind of protect the president team here, protecting Rhodos and allowing him to do Rhodos things, potentially winning fights. Obviously, this is easily countered by like a UDK or something like that. So if you're going against me in the arena, that's how you beat him, right? But there have been many instances where people still lose even with a UDK because Rhodos can most certainly pop off as a Rhodos, even start burning through the Stone Skin and or killing other champions along the way. So it's not a guarantee that UDK against him is going to win, but that is the easiest way to counter that. But yeah, I just don't have a great third team, honestly, to replace it with yet. And so I've just kept this one along there forever. But Nekret is obviously protecting Rhodos. Mithrala is in there for cleansing. She's in immunity, so she can get rid of any debuffs, and she has high resistance because she is Mithrala with her passive. And then Volgoth is in there in a bolster set to pair with Nekret's shield set. So this is a super shield team, and so we can tank a good amount of hits from the first hit and then cleanse anything off with Mithrala. And then if they do happen to hit through the shields or hit underneath the shields, then Volgoth has his passive to do a little bit of healing for everyone else. And so yeah, that's a breakdown of my 3 defense teams that I typically set every week. And you know, they'll mix and match depending on if I get better champions, you start to slot in and do more things. But that's pretty much where I set it every weekend, and it performs okay. It doesn't have to win every time. Again, the intent here is to disincentivize people from attacking you, and so I think it does a good enough job of being a deterrent to other people. So now let's talk about the end game progression, getting into gold and beyond. So the good news is most of the strategies basically stay the same as we talked about as far as climbing in bronze and silver. You still want to send your speed teams versus the tanky teams. You still want to send your tanky teams versus the speed teams, and you still want to try and win all 3 of the fights, or at least 2 out of the 3 of the fights. You still want to be following the moth cycle every week just to make it more efficient when it comes closer to the reset during the weekend. And of course, you want to be expanding your pool of arena specific champions that you want to build and use specifically for the arena. And at this point, people may have skipped forward to this section of the video hoping that there's some super secret sauce for getting into gold and claiming your Ramontu. And unfortunately, I'm here to tell you that there's no real secret to it. At the end of the day, arena is always going to be an RNG fest. So unfortunately, if you're not lucky enough to get some meta arena champions, you're going to have a very, very hard time contending with all the people and their defenses in the upper silvers and the lower gold tiers, just because the higher up you go, the better players are going to be, therefore the better champions they're going to have, and the meta is the meta. Now, that does not mean that you have to have, the top of the meta champions. You don't need the plat arena +4s and all this madness. I don't have a single empowered legendary on my account, nor do I have any empowered mythicals. And I basically sit in gold 1 every single week. And so it is possible. Obviously, there is some good RNG on my account in particular because I do have like Nekret the Great. I have a Rhodos. I have a Harima. I have Star Sage Galather. So there's a handful of champions that are super S tier on my account relative to other people's, but there are plenty of ones that I don't have. I don't have a Siphi, I don't have a Duchess, and the list kind of, I don't have a Lockout champion, Warlord, Yumiko. So the list goes on in both directions. And so the main takeaway here is that you have to make do with what you have. And so if you are fortunate enough to have some super arena meta champions, then by all means build them and use them for the arena. And if you don't, then you're gonna have to make do with what you have. And like I mentioned earlier, you do not have to have the top of the top when it comes to the arena meta. You can still use whoever you have, or just off meta champions. You can still work in certain situations. It doesn't mean that you only can be successful if you have Sigfrund and Taurus, right? You can still use Mashald because of the True Fears. You can still use Supreme Ilhane if you did her fusion to counter Nekrets and stuff like that. So make do with what you have, and that's basically the best tip that I can give you on top of everything else as far as being strategic. But the one thing I will throw out there specifically for getting into gold 1, or I guess any week that you're trying to climb, is that what you can do for that particular week is that instead of following the moth cycle, you could leave your defense in the entire week, which will not guarantee that you're going to stay in the green all the week, and you're going to probably do a lot less fights each day just because you're going to be sitting a bit higher, but you're sacrificing 1 week of potential gold bar return in order to make it easier to push when Sunday comes around. So if you keep your defense in all week and you take a handful of fights each of the days, there's still going to be some one-man defenses in the yellow zone. Probably not in the green zone, but that depends on what tier you're in. And so you'll just be sitting closer to green or sitting in the yellow. And thus, when it comes time to push on Sunday night or whenever it is local time for you, you'll just be starting off here or, top of yellow or maybe even bottom of green, depending on how well you did during the week. And you won't have to start all the way back in red, for example, and push all the way through red, then all the way through yellow, and then all the way into the green. So that strategy is what I personally employed when I was trying to get in gold 1 for the first time. I left my defenses in there all week, and I just took a few fights, kind of stayed in the middle or the top in the middle of yellow, and then when Sunday came around, I pushed into the green just for that night, just for that week, just to get into gold 1 and got the mission done on the next day. So as promised, here to end things off, I will show you an example of how I would typically choose teams to fight, and as well as build the teams to counter other teams. And we'll start with this team here. So sorry to Zam TM, no personal vendetta here. We're just gonna use you as an example. So team 1 here, we have a pretty standard cleave team with an Arbiter, Madame Ceres, and a AoE nuker. In this case, it's Foley. And then we have the addition of Lockout here with the Basher. So when it comes to Madame Ceres, the champion for me that always comes to mind is Stultus Dragonbane, because he is immune to decreased defense, because it will reflect it on the debuffer person. And so we don't have to worry about being taking damage from that. But also we're positive affinity to Foley, so he's more likely to weak hit and thus do a lot less damage. So we do have to worry about keeping him alive just in case the Foley gets lucky with some crits. So typically I would bring in the Nekret here. Obviously the buffs are going to get stripped off, but we're still less susceptible to damage because of the ally protection, which cannot be removed. Because there is a Basher here, I'm going to try and bring in a Glacea Soul Guide, because her passive can potentially block his lockout ability, so we're not going to be locked out of our abilities. And then I'm confident against this team that Foley's not going to hit hard enough, even though he is +3. So I don't necessarily need a Reviver, but I will bring in the Vogoth that I mentioned earlier, who's again in a bolster set. So now we have an irremovable shield across the entire team. We're protecting Stultus, and we should be able to bang it out, even if we only get to use his A1s for a turn or two. Now this next team here is a very fast speed team. I'm not going to bet that my Arbiter is going to be faster than the Aostrid into Lady Kimmy combo, and they have another Madame Ceres that we have to worry about, and then a Wukong to try and finish us off. So in this case, we're going to whip out the Tormund, because this is a pretty standard speed composition. We have turn meter fill and buffs here, turn meter fill and buffs here. Madame Ceres also notably gives herself a shield at the start of her turn. She does have Chainbreaker, but nonetheless she could also freeze herself, and then a Wukong. One can freeze himself when he comes back to life because you get turn meter because it boosts it to full. That's just how the game is coded. But also he's going to benefit from all the buffs, and thus he might still get frozen there. But we also don't want to die, so we're going to bring in Harima so that in case the Wukong goes ham, we can prevent his ignoring defense effects, although Harima will be weak to the Madame Ceres, so so we do have to keep that in mind. We're going to bring in Star Sage Galathir because, again, we don't want to die. We don't want to lose the fight, so we'll just keep him in the mix so he can revive people as need be. And then I think we'll just fill in here. We'll index hard into Harima as the counter, and we'll just bring in White Queen and Korra, so we have 2 ways of cleansing, and she also can't be CC'd, that being Harima. And then for Team 3 here, we have some annoying polymorph champions, probably a team with a bunch of shield. When you see a Brogni, typically expect them to have shield champions, and so we're going to bring in my anti-Stone Skin team here. I expect Stone Skin, well, in most cases, I expect Stone Skin on like practically every single team that's not a speed team, anything that looks like a tanky team, so that's just how I operate, and I personally don't use Stone Skin, and I also personally don't really use Polymorph either, because I just find them to be annoying, not healthy for the game, so I don't want to perpetuate those things, but you know, to my own detriment. But anyways, because this is a tankier team, that means that we should probably send a speed team at them, so we're going to run my super fun combo of Arbiter into Gizmak, so we can burn through the assumed amount of Stone Skin here, and because I'm expecting them to have shield or bolster, because they are running a Brogni probably to take advantage of his passive, let's bring in White King Narcisse, because we can ignore the shields and do you get the double hit. And then because just in case we don't want the Duchess to revive, and so I just bring in a Lydia just in case she gets a revive off. Let's go ahead and run these comps and see if we can get the dub here. One thing to note that I didn't mention earlier is that I also recommend you do this on manual, specifically on when it comes to the reset, just so that you don't have to contend with bad AI doing bad things. So we expected this to happen. Vogoth did his job. He sacrificed himself for the betterment of the team, and we can carry on there. So we get the freeze on them. We did get locked out on Staltus, but that is not a big deal. We can A1 try to deal some damage to Foley. He survives because we don't have increased defense, but that's fine. We can ally attack and make sure that he goes down. So the next target here, of course, will probably be Arbiter if we can get away with it. We should have our ability back on our next turn. Obviously, Madame Ceres there is controlled, so we don't have to worry about that. She also has the reflected decreased defense from Staltus, and so this should be able to kill at least Madame Ceres and Arbiter and then Basher, and she already burned to revive, so it doesn't really matter what she does at this point, and it's basically GG. We got a freeze on the A1 with Glacea, so we didn't actually get Glacea's passive to work. That is a bit of RNG as far as trying to get that dub, but we did nonetheless get the rest of the things to happen here. So now we're running the Torment here, and we got a couple of freezes, and honestly we froze the most important people, that being Wukong, so he did not get his turn off, and we're basically good to go. So we get to cut in here, and then now we can flip the script here with the Torment, start taking over the fight, get a bunch of freezes out. We have Harima taking her turn, and the squishiest person here looks like a Lady Kimmy, so we can kill her and get the free AoE attack there. And so Wukong is going to come back to life unless we can cycle back around to our other abilities in time. I don't think so, but okay. See, there again, another benefit of the Torment is that, like I said, when he gets revived, he boosts his turn meter to full because that's how his passive works, and he actually refroze himself, so he didn't really get a turn there. So showcasing the power of the Torment here. Hopefully this AoE is enough to kill Aostriad, and we weak hit on Wukong, of course. But yeah, we're good to go here with Torment again. We can provoke, so you don't have to worry about him doing his abilities here. Doesn't matter if he kills him. Ooh, bad choice. He got counterattacked and stunned, and yeah, stun set on the Torment. So there we go. Double weak hits. I'd love to see it, but we got that dub as well. And then team number 3, exactly as we predicted, double Stone Skin on UDK and the Duchess, as well as the bolster set on the Brogni. So we can do exactly what I intended to do from the get-go. We can go in there, burn all the Stone Skin off with Gizmak, and then they're sitting ducks with the shield set up, and then we get the double hit from Narcisse and clap, basically dead. So UDK survives. I don't know if we got a reaction hit there or not, but nonetheless, he is basically dead nonetheless. There you have it. That is a breakdown of how I typically approach 3v3 fights. Obviously, this is just a reflection of me being able to use the champions on my account, but the main takeaway here is the strategy that I'm employing as far as targeting the teams and building teams around them to counter them based on who I happen to have. And it's not just, again, all of the meta champions, so always using Taurus and Rhodos and all those things you could see here. Even though I have a Rhodos, 6-star Awakened, he didn't even feature on the teams, not because he's not good, but because he didn't just fit the teams that I was trying to counter. So in my particular case, that's basically what I would do. I would keep doing that, rinse and repeat, refresh it as often as I can, looking for more teams like that until I get myself comfortably into the yellow zone. And then at that point, I just wait for the reset to happen, and hopefully I maintain my gold status and repeat that week after week. And as soon as reset happens, I go into my defense and immediately set it back to the one-man defenses once again to start the moth cycle again for the week. All right, so that's going to do it for the Raid Starter Pack episode on Tag Team Arena. Hopefully you were able to glean some useful information to employ in your own tactics as far as progressing into further into bronze, deeper into silver, or eventually getting into gold 1 for that Ramon 2 mission. And of course, I wish you all the best of luck with the RNG for getting good champions as well as getting good gear to put on said champions. If you did find this video helpful, then be sure to hit that like button down below. It really does help out the channel. And if you enjoyed the video, then be sure to hit that subscribe button down below as well for more videos like this in the future. Thanks for watching and have a good one.